Hey, all my fellow model railroaders out there and all of my fellow YouTube subscribers and friends alike. My name is Bobby and I will be your host today for our very first ever episode of Model Train Tech, courtesy of Cherry's Texas Trains. Now, if you haven't seen the introduction to our particular YouTube channel, then you might want to head over to our main YouTube channel page to figure out what we are all about. But for our very first episode today, it was a really tough decision going through all sorts of locomotives and rolling stock, all in HO scale, to figure out what we're going to present for you guys today as our first ever premiere episode for this brand new series. Well, I couldn't think of a better place to start than getting the biggest bang for your buck, starting with one of the cheapest brands out there in all of HO scale model railroading. Now, for those of you who are new to this program, and I can only assume that a lot of you are, we are going to be focusing primarily and possibly only on HO scale model trains and rolling stock. Primarily, we'll be looking at locomotives and freight cars, but we might throw a few accessories or other things in the mix as well. But today, again, we are focusing on the cheapest brand you can buy, or at least one of the cheapest brands that you can buy in all of HO scale model railroading. I am, of course, talking about Bachmann HO scale model trains. But this model here is a little bit different for a couple of different reasons. For one, this is a Spectrum model. So this is Bachmann's upper end line, if you will. Over in the UK and overseas, I don't know that you guys carry the Spectrum line, but at least here in the United States, the Spectrum line is kind of the upper end. It's kind of what Hornby has with their super detail locomotives, and of course V-trains and Vi-trains and stuff over in the UK, over in Europe, and so on. So really, what one would normally expect seeing a Spectrum box is that this is a pretty high quality locomotive, but it gets even better because if we look at the upper corner of the box, we see that this one is digital command control equipped, or DCC for short, in case none of you knew what DCC meant. Now, this one is very special because this is the only steam locomotive that I actually currently own in my entire model railroad collection, and that includes some from the past, that includes some from now. I had a whole bunch of older steam engines way back in the day, but they have all since either broken or I've sold them or something like that. So this one here is the only one left, but it is the most special of my collection. If we look at the side of the box, there's the model code, as you can see right there, and I'm sorry if the camera goes out of focus on us here. You can see that it is an HO scale 282 Mikado in Susquehanna. Now, Susquehanna is telling only half the story because the locomotive contained within this box here actually runs and operates to this very day in real life. It is one of only two steam locomotives of this type that have ever been known, at least to my memory's recollection, to have ever run on American rails. And this is the only one left because the secondary one, I believe, was destroyed in a fire, part of a roundhouse fire a long time ago. My good friend Christopher Kovacs, aka Trainmaster 844 from my old YouTube channel and whatnot, one of my dear friends, told me about that. And it was actually through his channel that I managed to find this model. Now, the one he has is not DCC, but this one here is it is DCC, as I said. So that does mean it was a little bit more expensive. I actually bought this thing on eBay. This is a locomotive that I believe when it was new cost, I think, somewhere in the vicinity of $200 to $250. I paid less than $120 for this thing, and it was brand spanking new. It was all wrapped up in the plastic. I've since run it a bunch since then, and I've had no troubles with it at all, other than the fact it can't really pull worth a darn because it is relatively light. But other than that, we are here to give you guys a look at the Bachmann Spectrum Chinese SY282 Mikado. So, with all that in mind, let's go ahead and open the box and take a look at the model. So before we actually open the box, and I know we've already had a good look at it already, just here's the packaging. It's the typical Bachmann Spectrum packaging. Some of the models that I've known to come from Spectrum actually have kind of a sleeve over the top of them, but as you can see, this box is huge. I can't even really fit it in the camera unless I raise the tripod way up in the air. But this is as good a view as you're going to get because it's going to at least allow us to see the main item, which stretches about 3/4 the length of this box. So we'll go ahead and take the top off here. The first thing you notice, aside from this giant foam pad, is a nice little piece here from Bachmann themselves. As you can see, it's even in Chinese, and it shows you in English. On the back, it has the entire history of the Chinese SY locomotive. As you can see, it has it in Chinese and in English as well. It reads, SY steam locomotive. Class SY used on branch lines and in manufactories and mines. That's a weird way to spell that. Read that. I'm assuming factories of some kinds and mines. Was manufactured in 1960 in Dalian and Tangshan Locomotive Works by improving the design of the class Mikado 6 steam locomotive of this class. Steam locomotives of this class have been in service and production for the longest period of time compared with those employed by manufactories and mines because of its more advanced performances. It was solely manufactured by Tangshan Locomotive Works, where the first class SY was trial manufactured, and by 1996, when the production of it was canceled, 11,765 had been produced. The axle arrangement is 1-4-1. They count them as solid axles. They don't count them as the number of wheels. So in this case, it would be 1 axle in the front, 4 driving axles, and 1 trailing axle, thus making it, in America, a 2-8-2. The length of the locomotive and tender falls into 2 types, 21,643 millimeters and 21,519 millimeters. You do the math on that one. The locomotive empty weight was 75.5 tons, and the wheel rim power is 1,103.25 kilowatts. The construction speed is 80 kilometers an hour. So 80 kilometers an hour, if you calculate that out, well, 100 kilometers an hour is 62 miles an hour. So this thing was not built to go fast, in other words. So we'll put the nice little brochure aside, take off the piece of foam, and there it is. Now, I would like to, first off, give a reference to my dear friend Will, otherwise known as Intercity82 over in the UK, for introducing me to this term. As you can see, it's surrounded by foam, but it's encased in, you guessed it, a giant block of ice. I mean, as he says, it literally looks like it's frozen, and I can kind of see where he's right. It's got this giant sleeve over this kind of plastic crate that you break open one end of it and then pull the locomotive out and then toss the plastic aside, like I know a lot of people do. I like to keep it all together, so I usually put the sleeve and stuff back in. We'll go ahead and take the locomotive out, and we'll get a look at it here in just a second. But here's the rest of the stuff that comes with it. As you can see, there's a few detail parts. I didn't even know what these were. I think those are hand railings or something of some kind. A piece of graphite or like weathering powder. I don't even know. It looks like a real coal powder that you would use to weather like the locomotive itself. That is so weird. And my cat is trying to nuzzle the tripod at the same time. How stupid is she? Anyways, this is all about the NMRA conformant decoders, including Bachmann Easy Command decoders. Okay, so that's all about the Easy Command system. This is the, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here. This is the 1-year warranty when purchased in the United States or Canada. This tells you all about the decoder that's inside the locomotive. Oh wow, it even shows you instructions on how it was put together. Again, it's in Chinese and in English. How funny is that? Mail in, I think this is for a club or something like that. Oh, to validate the warranty. Bachmann standard line Spectrum catalog. Don't need that because I prefer other models. But this one here, I believe, oh, those are the plugs if you want to turn the locomotive from DC to DCC. So basically, you can run this on both DC and DCC. So we'll go ahead, throw all the gubbins, as a lot of people like to call them. I actually like that term, even though I'm properly American English, not British UK English, but I like that term anyways. We'll put the foam back in the box, put the locomotive down for a second. We'll get to that in just a moment. Put the foam back on top. Put this here and take the lid, put it on. And we'll go ahead, take the box, set the box over to the side, and let's take a look at what, in my own personal opinion, is the most detailed Bachmann Spectrum steam locomotive to ever come from Bachmann Locomotive Works, or Bachmann Model Railroading Company. Alrighty guys, as you can see, we still have our gorgeous Chinese 282 SY Mikado still enclosed in its block of ice here in front of us, so it's about time we free this thing from its frozen prison so we can actually take a much better look at its black beauty. Anyways, go ahead and push on one end of it, and you can see it has two parts. As you can see, like I said before, it has a sleeve that covers the sides of the locomotive, and then you have the actual case that holds it in on its own. So you just slide the sleeve off, as you can see, put that to the side, then all you do is crack open one end of this thing, like that. Can be a little bit fiddly, and since this locomotive and its tender are connected together, they're not two separate pieces. Since this thing does have digital command control in it, we will go ahead and take them out as one. Now I usually very lightly grip onto the locomotive and tender. That was a little bit of an annoying noise. Anyways, so there we go. Get them out. Put this inside of there. Take this away. And wow. Every time I take this locomotive out of the box, it just looks amazing. So let's go ahead and get a little bit more of an up close and personal look at this beautiful black steamer. Alrighty, so now that we've got this thing on the ground, or glass in this case, we'll go ahead and start right up here at the front of the locomotive, and I will tell you right off the bat, this is where you're going to see the most detail ever. And yes, I'm using a very, very tiny hex wrench, or torque wrench as you like to call them, to actually point things out, because, well, it's the only thing I could find without jabbing something into the side of this thing, because I do want to keep this thing in pristine condition. The first thing that I noticed right off the bat is all of the separately applied detail on this model. One thing that most buyers of Bachmann products or Bachmann products will actually notice is that on their locomotives, specifically their steam engines, they usually have a lot of molded in detail. They usually have a lot of things, apart from rivets and stuff, that are actually molded in and cast in as one piece. But I will tell you, so many of the parts on just the locomotive itself, forget the tender, just the locomotive itself is incredible. If we kind of move the camera around, see if it'll focus just a hair on the front of this engine, because it is just amazingly beautiful. You've got this accurately detailed number plate right here. The headlight, it even has applied 142 number boards. Even the bell on this thing, if you touch it just ever so gently, you'll see that it does actually move. If I can touch it just barely enough, you can see that the bell actually does move. It'll swing all the way up and around. It doesn't ring, of course, or anything, but as you can see, it moves just as wonderfully. It has the accurate little handrails. This is the only 282 Mikado that I've ever seen with handrails that stick out like this. I mean, it's not anything the Americans have done on their steam engines. Maybe a set of steam shields would go right here, but these are very accurate to the Chinese SY Mikado. Up on the top here, the steam chimney, or the smokestack, I couldn't even get the word out, that is molded in, but it does have a nice hole going right down through the top, and the detail is absolutely exquisite. Even more so, they've put in these rivets here, and it looks like, from the looks of things, it almost looks like this front door here doesn't swing open, but it looks like it is separately applied all on its own. And if we move the camera back just ever so slightly, get a look at the front cow catcher here. You can see the stairs and everything. Those are specifically applied. Those are cast in, though. Those are all molded in details. But as you can see, even it comes pre-assembled with a nice little separately applied hose. It does come with standard knuckle couplers. You won't find any horn hooks or anything like that on this Spectrum model. So you can run this engine tender first, or you can run it the normal way, which is this way. The thing that I do like prototypically about the front end of this locomotive is the headlight itself. I may have mentioned it just a bit ago, but it does turn a beautiful bright yellow when you turn it on. It just looks absolutely amazing. Up here on the side, and you'd really have to use a magnifying glass to get a look at it. You can't even see it with the camera. If you look right here, this whole plaque is in Chinese, for one, but I do believe this is a builder's plate of some kind. I do believe that the Chinese included the builder's plate when this locomotive here was brought over to the United States. I don't remember all the history off the top of my head. I'll insert probably a few annotations as we go. But one thing I can tell you, as we scoot the camera back just a little bit more, one thing I can tell you about the 142, or more specifically the Susquehanna 142, is that this locomotive right here runs on what they call the Bel-Del Railway. I forget the full name of it, but the Bel-Del is basically, it's something in Delaware. I think it's Belvedere in Delaware, something like that. Anyways, what this locomotive does is it's used for passenger trips, it's used for photo freight runs, it's used for all that, and I will tell you, this is probably one of the nicest sounding locomotives to ever grace American rails. I mean, it has a wonderful bark from the exhaust up top. They've fitted every kind of whistle imaginable to man. It had the original Chinese 5 chime on it at one point. It had everything from a Southern 3 chime to a Southern Pacific 6 chime. It had everything else in between put on it, and I will tell you, they do say the whistle changes the voice of an engine, and I will tell you it really does. But back to this model here, looking down at the linkage on this thing, the timing rods here, those are absolutely wonderful. The wheels themselves, and I don't know how well the camera can pick these up, but if you just look at those, these wheels are so accurate to the actual real deal. The real live 142 has these type of wheels, and even the original Chinese Mikados had these exact wheels, but these were painted red when they're over in China. They had this kind of same paint scheme, the silver nose with the black on the rest of it, but they were mainly put into service with red painted wheels and little red accents everywhere else. As I said before, over in China they classify this as a 141, but here in America we classify it as a 282. That means it has 2 front wheels on the front axle. You have 8 driving wheels, to which the pistons actually drive the locomotive, and then you have 2 trailing wheels on the rear axle right here. Now the rear axle is spring-loaded, and if you do pick it up, it does tend to droop just a little bit. But moving from the front of the engine along the side, a lot of this detail here is all separately applied. The pipe work here, all of this up top on the side of the dome, up here leading all the way up to the cab, the small horn up here on the cab, because in China apparently they have an air horn and a steam whistle applied to both of them. You can see the safety valves up here on the top. Those are separately applied. And the horn, the whistle, and the valves, those are all painted this beautiful kind of dark gold color. But again, most of the detail on here is not molded in. I mean, like these bars on the side of the locomotive's boiler, those are about the only molded in details that you can find on this engine. There are a few that are stuck so close they look molded in, but for the most part, about the only molded details I can see are like down here on the firebox, right up here on the upper portion of the firebox underneath the boiler, and some of the details up here looks, again, they're so close to the boiler that they look like that they've all been molded in, basically. But the thing I just cannot get over is if you see these side rods going around and around, watching it run by, I will tell you it just looks phenomenal. It's so exquisite to watch these side rods going around as the engine's coming at you. If you get down kind of eye level with it, it just looks so surreal. And then coming around to the cab of the locomotive ever so slightly, we have cab detail. We actually have a couple of guys inside of the locomotive. Now, what is so weird about Chinese engines compared to a U.S. locomotive is that the engineer on a US locomotive will normally sit on the right-hand side of the engine. But in China, they had him way over here on the left. Now, as you can see, you've got the little driver there. You've got his seat. If you look from where behind the tender is, you'll actually see there's some in-cab detail, and we'll get to that here in just a second. But as you can see, accurately applied numbers, class N4. I think that's what we classify it here in the United States. Either that or that's its Chinese classification. Up on the roof, there are some separately applied doors that don't really go anywhere. They're separately applied, but they stay open up here, these little flaps up here. I'm assuming that's to either let heat out or let air in. You take your pick. But one thing that I will tell you, just moving this locomotive around ever so gently, is this thing is not very heavy. It is actually a very light steam engine, and unfortunately that is its downfall because it does not come with traction tires on any one of the 8 drive axles. So you probably would only get away with a pretty light load, maybe 5 or 6 cars. I've had upwards of only a couple of passenger cars behind this thing, and they're the very light ones, and it seems to have no problem with them. But this thing is not a real heavy hauler. I mean, you'd have to put 3 of these together if you wanted a real sense of pulling power on a decent-sized train. But as far as everything else goes, from the front down the side to the back of the cab here, everything just looks absolutely exquisite. Again, one other molded detail that I can tell you is is the trailing truck here. Not the wheel, but just this whole part here looks kind of cast together. And we'll put it up on its lid here in a second, and we'll show you the underside of it. But let's go ahead and take a better look at that in-cab detail, and then we'll go on to the tender. All right, now I know this is a bit dark, and I'm only going to be on this for a very, very short period of time. But as you can see, even the interior of the cab is somewhat well detailed. I mean, I said there's not a lot of molded stuff on here, but if you look, as I'm almost poking the glass here, if you look at the inside of the cab here, all of this on the firebox and everything, that is all molded in. However, the 2 guys sitting in the chairs, those are separately applied details, and they add just such an awesome bit of character to this engine itself. It's a big plus if you can find a steam locomotive, especially one in this price range and as rare as this one is, because they don't even make this one anymore. I've not even seen it in N scale recently. But this one here, just, I mean, it's amazing that for the money, if you can find one even brand new, but on a budget, so to speak, if you can find one of these, DCC or not, you are going to be well surprised by the level of detail that is put even into the cab here. It would have been nice if they had, like, you know, added some color and whatnot to the inside, like maybe some gauges and stuff like that. But for what it is, I will tell you, it's pretty astounding to even see cab detail on a Bachmann locomotive, or Bachmann. So now on to the connections and the tender. All right, so now here we are at the tender of this beautiful steam engine, and as you can see, it's really nothing super extraordinary to look at. If we move just a little bit to the left, you can see that this locomotive is connected right there between the tender and here. It's not one of those ones where you can just take the tender, drop it into a pin, and away you go. I do believe the DCC chip is housed inside of the tender, if I read the instructions and everything correctly. So the fact that this is there, it's to protect all of the wires, which are way the heck over here on the fireman's side of the locomotive. Again, this engine's kind of backwards. It's like how the Chinese and Japanese love to drive. They drive on the wrong side of the road and everything else. But again, moving back to the tender, and I'll kind of try to go up above here in just a bit to show you some of the up top detail on both the engine and the tender. It's got separately applied handrails up here, but these are so fragile. They are plastic, so unfortunately, unlike the front that had some metal feeling handrails to them, these are sturdy. Don't get me wrong, they're very, very sturdy, but they are not metal handrails. However, you do have a small metal handrail, from what I can see, right here, just behind the cab of the locomotive. You also, I didn't even notice this, you have a little rail running up there. I guess that's a grab rail to step down off of the engine. What would have been really sweet is if they had some kind of a platform between here, but then again, If you're running this engine around tight curves, which you can, but I wouldn't recommend, you're probably going to end up with that platform jamming into the tender, and then you have a giant mess. Now, at a couple points in time, they did actually have a name painted on here, and I can't remember it for the life of me. Again, this is the first time really going in depth with this SY. I do know they had, actually I think they had it on the cab of this locomotive. It was William something or other. I do know the first name, I believe, was William, but it was in honor of somebody that either belonged to the railroad or a historical figure of some kind. The only other applied details to this thing, and I'll try to focus it in as much as I can here. If you look at the back of this engine, right up in here, let's see if I can get it to focus just a little bit. As you can see right there on the tender, it does say NYSWs. That stands for New York, Susquehanna, and Western, number 142, with the Susquehanna logo on it. It even has the original specifications. It says 10 tons and 6,600 gallons. So that's 6,600 gallons of water and 10 tons of coal for the top. As far as finishing details go, you have what looks to be sort of half molded in and half separately. Is it separately applied? It is, actually. It is a separately applied step ladder right here on the back of the engine. You have a reverse light. That's the dark amber. That's the same color as the one on the headlight of the engine. You have a small little trap door back here, and you'll see it better when we go up top. But unfortunately, that doesn't open or anything like that. Final thoughts on the tender. I can tell you it looks fantastic. It works wonders. Very light. Again, if it was its own separate piece, it would be extremely light. And again, I love how they did the wheels, the same as the ones on the front of it, very accurately displayed on these molded Bachmann trucks. This is very, very typical Bachmann trucks here. So let's go ahead and go up top, and then we'll turn this thing over and show you how it works underneath. Alrighty, so here we are on the top of this 282 Mikado here, and like I said, you know, I kind of touched on a few things up here on the top when we were down looking at the front and the side of the engine here, but this really gives us an opportunity to see how much detail that Bachmann has actually really put into this locomotive here. As you can see here on the tender starting off, we have a pretty fake coal load. I don't know if that's what that coal dust was for, was to put it here. I honestly think that dust and stuff that was in the box is like weathering powder or something like that to make this locomotive look a little bit more realistic. But I like to keep it nice and clean and shiny because I know that that's how the real 142 looks to the best of my knowledge. Everything else though, like I said, the two little flaps up here on top of the cab, those are separately applied. They're not molded in by any stretch of the imagination. However, they're not releasable, so you can't just knock them up and then let them flatten. It would have been a little nicer to have that, but again, this is Bachmann we're dealing with. This isn't Athearn or Atlas or anybody like that even made a locomotive like this. Again, you can see the small little two-chime horn. Again, that's on the engineer's side, so he has control over both the horn and he also has control over the small, the engine would have had a standard 5-chime Chinese steam whistle on it, so that's one thing. Again, just more of this piping, this detail and everything up here. It all may look molded in, but I'm dead serious. This is separately applied stuff, and it's so hard to find that on a Bachmann locomotive nowadays. Like I said, way up here at the front of the engine, the steam or smokestack, it is deep. I think there might be a screw of some kind down in there, but I don't see one that will allow you to actually get inside of the engine, maybe take it apart, but I really don't want to. As far as everything else goes, I love all the detail up on top of this thing. Again, this is quite possibly, if not, the only steam engine that I have ever seen come from Bachmann model trains to actually have so much detail like this. I really think they outdid themselves with this one particular engine. It's absolutely amazing. Again, if only they could have worked on the performance a little bit, because that would have been just a little bit nicer. But other than that, I definitely give Bachmann a round of applause for this one. They actually did a fantastic job as far as nailing down the details, getting this engine in the proper specifications for HO scale. It may look small to some eyes, But then again, in real life, it is a relatively small engine. It's actually smaller than some of the standard passenger cars that you'd find on tourist trains and whatnot nowadays anyways. So now that we have all of that out of the way, I'm going to try to find a way and turn this thing upside down so that you guys can get a better look at how it actually works and see a little bit of the mechanisms underneath, and then we'll cut to a couple of the running shots. Alrighty guys, so as you can see, I've gone ahead and turned the engine on its side. I've put the little foam pad from the first part of the box that we showed you in the very beginning of the video. I went ahead and put that on the table so that the engine would at least have something or other to rest on here. But I'll go ahead and bring the camera back just a hair, see if it'll maybe focus a little bit better. But really, on the underside of the engine itself, there really is nothing to see. Like I said, the rear trailing truck is one molded part, and I'm not sure how well you can see that, if the light will pick that up. There you go. As you can see, it's pretty much one whole piece that just pivots back and forth with the molded detail on the side. So, I mean, it would have been nice if they had, you know, a little bit more of a realistic truck, but then again, you don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff. One thing I can tell you is that there's really nothing to see up here in the front. What really happens on this locomotive happens by the tender. So the tender, as you can see, these little brass pickups here, these are where the engine gets its power. I mean, you could set these wheels on the track up here in the front of the engine. You could set them on the track and the engine would run, but you have to put the tender on the track in order for it to actually, you know, pick up power and receive the address. I've gone ahead and programmed this engine already to locomotive number 142, of course, by the digits on the side of the engine. As you can see right here on the bottom, in case it wasn't obvious enough on the box, it says that it is, or that there is DCC on board, and I'm sorry if it's so blurry. I've been having trouble with this camera lately. Anyways, you just have standard metal wheels with the painted sides, and really, again, there's not that much to see on the bottom of this engine. One thing I can show you, though, is when this engine goes around curves, if you notice this sort of X here in the middle, as the locomotive turns, you can see how one of the pins pulls up towards the other side of the engine, or as on the other side. So as you can see, if the wheels will move correctly, if you can see when I turn it, as the locomotive turns, the two bottom pins start to come together. So that is how the locomotive is able to actually take such tight turns. I could have this thing all the way like that, and it would still be perfectly fine. But I don't want to turn it too tight because of, again, all the wires and stuff like that underneath. But really, other than that, there's not really too much to look at underneath this engine. And again, the real way that it gets its power is through these brass pickups here. One of the things that is rather neat is also on the underside, I'll move it back over here to this trailing truck, is that this is somewhat sprung. There is a little bit of a spring underneath there to give it a little bit more of a kind of quote-unquote cushioned ride as it rolls along. I will tell you that as the engine rolls along, if you look at it from the front, you can see it kind of waving back and forth a little bit. It's typical of steam engines of all varieties because of the linkages going around and around and around. But as you can see, look at even how detailed these linkages are. I mean, you look, here's the topmost portion of it. These are the outside timing rods. Then you have the main drivers. Then you also have the secondary rods underneath that go back and forth right here. So you've got all these rods right here put together. So you've got three separate rods put together. You got the little bitty one, you got the larger one, and then of course you have the main driving rod right here as well. So that about wraps it up for talking about this engine as a whole. Why don't we go ahead and show you how this thing runs? Cut away to the running clips. Alrighty guys, so that wraps up this nice little review of Bachmann Spectrum's 282 Chinese SY Mikado. Now, if you want to buy this particular engine, well, you're not buying mine for start. I'm keeping this baby until it literally blows up, and even when it does blow up, I'm going to put a new motor in it and keep it running, because this is by far my favorite steam locomotive ever. I don't care if somebody handed me the nicest steam engine tomorrow and tried to trade me for this, I wouldn't give it up. I just love it too much. If you want to buy one of these, best of luck to you. Search eBay, Amazon, Google, whatever your favorite model train websites are. I mean, I know there's ones, Lombard Hobbies. That's a great website. I don't know that he has this one, but he has some great stuff, and I have an engine on the way from him. You can look at model train stuff, you can look at discount model trains, and even check with your local hobby shops to see if there is a way that you can actually locate one of these. Again, your best bet's probably going to be an internet auction site, so probably eBay would be your best bet to search for one of these. Just type in Susquehanna or 282 number 142, something like that. Just whatever search tools you want to find this. Again, this one is available in HO scale. It is also available in N if you want one. Expect to pay, I would say, budget about $120 to $180 for a good used one, maybe a new one sealed in box if you're that lucky. If you find one new sealed in box, you may pay as much as over $200 for one of these if you find a good one like I did. But again, I paid about $120 for this one. So I hope you guys have enjoyed our very first premiere episode of Model Train Tech, courtesy of Cherry's Texas Trains. Remember guys, there's a whole lot of trains out there, so get out there and keep on railroading. Again, this has been Bobby, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.